This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Thank you so much for inviting me this evening. Such an honor to see a Kehilla so imbued with a sense of community, sense of achdos, and a real desire for growth. So I want to share with you, in the year 1906, the Ridvaz, Rabbi Yaakov David Wolowski, Rabbi Yaakov David ben Ze'ev, he had studied the Yerushalmi for 30 years. He had spent 17 years mastering the Hirushim on the Yerushalmi, whereupon he embarked on writing his own commentary on the Yerushalmi. And he completed 3 Siddharim of Yerushalmi, and he ran out of funds, so like anyone who publishes books knows, you need money. So he came to America. And interestingly, Seder Nezikin of the Ridvaz was dedicated, if you look at the Ridvaz, is dedicated to his American patrons. He comes to Chicago in 1903, and he's immediately given the position of the chief rabbi of the Russian American congregations in Chicago. And he's a rabbi, he's a pulpit rabbi, and he's in big trouble. In 10 months, he was forced to resign. His constituents, and especially the Butchers Union, they tried to kill him. They took him, and they put him in a freezer, and they locked the door on Shabbos. Miraculously, he escaped, and he felt that if his Balabatim would have known that he escaped, they would literally slaughter him with a knife. So he writes in his Sefer on Chumash, he had to be Mechalel Shabbos and run out of Chicago. But don't feel that bad for him, because he ran to New York to another beleaguered colleague of his, Rabbi Jacob Joseph, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, and he came to be Mechazek, his beleaguered colleague. We know Rabbi Yaakov Yosef was somewhat of the chief rabbi, the Rav HaKoilel. So if you can imagine the aggravation of one shul, he was the rabbi of 18 shuls. And the politics of the Rabbanos and also the Butchers Union caused him such deep emotional distress that it literally ultimately took his life. And in 1903, the Ridvaz came to the Pike Synagogue on the Lower East Side, and he delivered the following message. He said, the Pasuk says, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah ar. The Pasuk compares the performance of a good deed to a candle. And learning of Torah is like a fire. What is the analogy? Said the Ridvaz. There used to be, back in the day, we're talking 1903, so maybe in the 1850s or the early 1800s, you had a Jew, for no better terminology, these Jews were called mitzvah yidin. What's a mitzvah yid? A mitzvah yid is a Jew, he davens with the minyan 3 times a day. He puts on talis, he puts on tefillin, he's careful on shatnez, he eats gefilte fish. A mitzvah yid. He does all the important mitzvahs. He may even say pitam akteres from a clown. Can you imagine? And these yidden, they didn't learn that much. They didn't think that Limud Torah was an important part of their spiritual repertoire. And they felt that they would successfully be able to give over the candle of the Torah to the next generation. And you know what? They were absolutely correct. They successfully passed down the light of mitzvahs to the next generation. After all, a mitzvah is a brilliant candle. A mitzvah illuminates the galus. And they produce children and grandchildren of Erlich Yidden, as the Rav mentioned. But said the Ridvaz, that was back in the day. That was in the early 1800s. That was in the 1850s. But times have changed. We live in modern times, says the Ridvaz. The winds are blowing. We have liberty. We have equality. We have opportunity. And that flame, that candle of mitzvahs will begin to flicker. And it will wane. And it will extinguish. Says the Ridvaz in the beginning of the 20th century, 115 years ago, that it is no longer viable to be a mitzvah yid. That a Jew who only performs mitzvahs and does not learn Torah will have nothing to give over to the next generation. Says the Ridvaz, today you need to be a Torah yid. Because the fire of Torah will never flicker, it will never wane, it will never extinguish. If you want to practice meaningful Judaism today, says the Ridvaz, in modern times, 115 years ago, if you want to give over meaningful Judaism, then the learning of Torah has to be a very important staple in your spiritual diet. And this is exactly what we see in this week's Parsha. Klal Yisrael had just successfully completed the impossible. Nobody ever escaped Egypt. The Medrash says Egypt was locked down with witchcraft and kishuf. No one ever escaped Egypt. And the Jews went out in broad daylight, and they come to the Yam Suf, and at the Yam Suf they went like this. They pointed at HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They said, Zeh Kehilla. There's only one prophet in our history who was able to say Zeh. Moshe Rabbeinu. Even Yecheskel couldn't point. Even Yirmiyah couldn't point. Only Moshe Rabbeinu, with the clarity of his prophecy, could say Zeh, and every single simple Jew saw God with their own eyes. But immediately after, the pasuk says, "V'aliyelchu shleishes yamim v'lo matzu mayim." They went 3 days, they couldn't find water. Says the Gemara, Bava Kama Daf Pei Beis Ein Mayim Ela Torah, that the Jews went 3 days without the learning of Torah, and they began to complain, and they began to rebel. So Moshe Rabbeinu came along, and he made a new takana, Kriyas HaTorah, every 3 days, every Monday, every Thursday, every Shabbos. This way a Jew never goes 3 days without Torah. But one simple question, friends. They couldn't go 3 days without Torah. They just went 210 years without Torah. There was no laning. Not Monday, not Thursday, not Kanesim, not Rosh Chodesh. Never. They didn't learn a word for 210 years. And there was no problem. There was no rebellion. And 3 days and all of a sudden they rebel? 210 years, yeah. 3 days, no. I want to tell you about a gadol. Many people probably have heard his name, but he doesn't get the attention he deserves, and that is Rav Simcha Wasserman. Zecharna L'bracha. Rav Simcha is really one of the Torah pioneers of the 20th century. Interestingly, Rav Simcha Wasserman saw the Chafetz Chaim on the last Yom Kippur of the Chafetz Chaim's life, and after Yom Kippur, Rav Simcha came to the Chafetz Chaim and he took leave of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim said goodbye. And as Rav Simcha is walking out, the Chafetz Chaim calls him. He says, "One more word. I want to tell you that you should know that when Mashiach comes, the Messiah will not forget about one Jew. They could be anywhere in the world. The Mashiach is going to go fetch them." And Rav Simcha didn't understand why the Chafetz Chaim was telling him this, but later on in life he realized the Chafetz Chaim was giving him marching orders, that he would spend the rest of his life going from one midbar, from one wilderness to the next. Much of the Torah that we have today in America and in the world is due to Rav Simcha Wasserman. You know, it's interesting. I'll ask you a little trivia question. Outside of the state of Israel and the United States of America, does anybody know where the biggest Jewish community in the world is today? Wow. This is a Kehilla. Very good. France. France is the only country other than the United States and Israel that has close to 500,000 Jews. And in the 1930s, you know how many yeshivas were in France? 0. Rabbi Chanan sent Rabbi Simcha to France to establish the first yeshiva. The entire Torah community in France is because of Rabbi Simcha Wasserman. He established the first day school in Detroit, the first yeshiva for young adults in Southern California, first yeshiva in Los Angeles. Now, unfortunately, Rabbi Simcha and his Rebbetzin were never blessed with children. The interesting thing, Rabbi Simcha and Eretz Yisrael had a neighbor, Rabbi Shlomo Lawrence, MK. And Rabbi Shlomo Lawrence actually asked to have a chavrusa shaft with Rabbi Simcha Wasserman. They learned for a number of years together. And when Rabbi Simcha passed away, Rabbi Shlomo Lawrence then bought the 2 adjacent graves to Rabbi Simcha and his wife. And he told his family and his Saba that probably nobody's going to go visit Rabbi Simcha Wasserman. He doesn't have children. So this is what you're going to do. When me and Mommy pass away, and you come to visit us, you go to Reb Simcha. Now listen to this. Reb Simcha passed away Beis Cheshvan. Reb Shlomo Lawrence passed away Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. You can't go to the cemetery Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. So all of Reb Shlomo Lawrence's relatives come the next day Beis Cheshvan, and they go for the yard side of Reb Simcha. Now, Rav Simcha's in Los Angeles. His wife was in Detroit. She was a teacher. She would send over her paycheck to the Rav to be able to teach children. But they didn't have children, and the separation was very painful. And after 2 years, Rav Simcha Wasserman said, I can't leave you alone. And he was going to come back. And she said, absolutely not. She said, if God has not blessed us with children, it's only so that you could build Torah across the United States. Otherwise, what are we going to bring upstairs after 120? So this way, all the young children that you teach, they'll be our children. Says Rav Simcha Wasserman, 210 years, not a problem, because in Egypt they brutalized us. They tortured us. They persecuted us. They reminded us who we were. In Egypt, you could be a mitzvah yid. But the moment we stepped out of Egypt and we were free and we had equality, liberty, opportunity, a Jew in a free land cannot exist, not a moment without the Torah. 210 years you could keep mitzvahs, but not in a land of freedom. In a land of freedom, you have to have Torah every 3 days, minimum. If this is what Rav Simcha Wasserman said about the land of Egypt, imagine what he would say today. So it's so beautiful to see a Kehilla, not only of mitzvah yidden, of Torah yidden, as the Rav mentioned, Baruch Hashem, the Shiurim are so well attended. Look, I've been a Rav in 2 different shuls. 33% is unheralded numbers. But Be'ezus Hashem, part of being a Torah yid is not only going to Shiurim. Because, we're in the age of Daf Yomi. Everybody loves the Daf Yomi, and I hope the Daf Yomi more than quadruples, but it's not enough to learn, not from a Sefer and not from a Magid Shiur. You need to have a Rav. I'll tell you a personal thought. I don't like to say it in my own shul because it's self-serving, but I'm happy to say it here. The Gemara says if you find a lost object and 2 lost objects, your father's and your Rebbe, you return your Rebbe because your father brought you into this world and your Rebbe brings you into the world to come. And I would believe that it's true. The same way, as far as I know, nobody ever got into this world without a father. As far as I know. There's also only one way to get to the world to come. You need to have a Rebbe. You need to have a Rav. And as much as the Rav tries to reach out to everyone, it's the people's responsibility to make a relationship with the Rav, to ask Shilas, to hang out with him, to bother him, to bother Halavai. The Rav should say, the people, I don't have enough time. They associate with me too much. Baruch Hashem, we live in a time of great Torah learning. But Ra'isi b'nei aliyah v'hinei muatim, there are not enough people who make it their business, really to make the Rav part of their lives. And I say this, because I see it. But Baruch Hashem, this Kehilla, in 14 years, as the Rav mentioned, Yemincha Hashem Nedari V'Koyach. So we're Mavarch the Kehilla, they have the first Yad, Be'ezus Hashem, they should reach the age of Koyach, they should reach another 14 Gesundte Yaren, and after that, even more and more. Let me just leave off with one thought about Tu B'Shvat, which is tomorrow night. What does it mean to be a Torah Yid? To see things with the Torah perspective. So tomorrow night is Tu B'Shvat, and there's this ancient custom that many have. Interestingly, the Magen Avram calls it a minhag Ashkenaz. Somehow today it became a minhag Sfard, to eat a lot of fruits. By the way, you know what fruits are? Fruits are those things, they sell them in the store. Like 50 years ago, people used to eat them. They come in round shapes. Some are red, some are orange. There's no wrapper around them. There's something called fruits that they used to be such a thing. And here's the order of how to eat the fruits. Fruit number 1 is the Zayas. Fruit number 2 is the Tamar. Fruit number 3 is the Geffen. Fruit number 4 is the Te'ena. And finally the Rimain. Why this order? The Mekubalim explain there's a great significance to this order. You take the olive. The olive is bitter. You put the pit in your mouth. Blah! It's bitter. You can't even hold it in your mouth for 1 second. It's bitter. Like the Yonah said, right? We have an expert in Yonah, the Yonah, but not Sefer Yonah, the Yonah in Parshas Noach. The Yonah said, better a bitter olive. But then comes the Tamar. The Tamar is sweet. So you take that pit and you roll it in your mouth just 1 extra second. And then you have the Geffen. The Geffen, the pits are so small, sometimes you even eat the pit. And then you have the Te'ena. The Te'ena Now the seeds are actually an integral part of the fruit. But the highest madrega is the rima and the pomegranate. Where there is no fruit, the fruit is the seed. The Torah is telling us that through the right perspective, you can take something bitter in life and you can slowly sweeten it. You can incorporate it in your life where actually it becomes the most delicious thing. But you have to know how to look at things. Yosef HaTzadik falls to the bottom of the pit, and we know it wasn't an empty pit. There were snakes and scorpions in the pit. Now that's dangerous. The Gemara says if someone falls in a pit with snakes and scorpions, you could testify they died. But I'm pretty sure that when Yosef was in that pit, he heard the voice of the snake and the scorpion. Because if you look in Parak Shira, Nachash Nahu Omer, what does the snake say? Soimech Hashem l'chol hanoiflim, v'zoikev l'chol hatfufim. God supports all the fallen. So while the brothers were saying, there goes Joseph, Yosef heard the call of hope. Yosef was a Torah yid. He saw even in the most desperate situation, you could take the pit of the olive and transform it into the sweet seed of the rimai. He heard the snake being mechazek him. Akrav mahu oimer. Toiv Hashem la'koyol, v'racham avakol masav. One who attaches themselves to the Torah could sweeten everything. You could come tomorrow and you could take a stick and the Eitz HaChaim could sweeten even the most bitter waters. Thank you so much for joining me, for allowing me to join you this evening. Bracha v'atzlacha to the whole Kehilla, and we're mevarech the Rav, many happy and healthy years at the helm of this Kehilla, and may we all come together for many happy occasions. Agud Devach. Thank you so much.
This concludes tonight's program. We'll have dessert, bench, and then Chinese auction. Also want to mention the Simcha fund is depleting. We're asking for $20 for Simchas. You can bring it in a check, cash, or pay the shul directly, and we'll give it to the appropriate organizers. Thank you. Have a good night.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.